The library was supposed to be a refuge, a quiet sanctuary where I could take Sophia, let her explore her love for books, and let the silence of the place wash over us, if only for an hour. After the chaos of the past few weeks, this was supposed to be the one moment of peace we could share, a break from the noise, the stress, the daily grind of caring for a disabled child in a world that sometimes seemed too harsh. Sophia, small and delicate in her wheelchair, was excited. I could see it in her eyes as we entered the library, her little fingers gripping the arms of her chair, as if the world around her were a grand adventure. It had been too long since we'd gone out, too long since we had ventured into the world beyond our doorstep, free from the constant surveillance of neighbors and the micromanaging eyes of the HOA. Our community had always prided itself on its perfection, and while that might have seemed idyllic at first, it had become a constant source of tension. There was always something to worry about, whether Sophia's wheelchair was too visible, whether our front yard met the exact standards, whether the trash cans had been brought in at exactly the right time. All the things that mattered in the perfect little bubble that Maple Creek had become. But I had hoped that, for just one afternoon, we could escape all of that and simply enjoy our time together. The soft rustling of pages and the hum of quiet conversations should have been soothing, but something in the air felt off. I pushed Sophia's wheelchair past the aisles of books, letting her fingers brush the covers as she marveled at the colorful spines. We were headed toward the children's section, where she could sit on the soft carpet with other kids listening to a story being read aloud. It was a simple plan, one that should have been just another normal day in our lives. But as we rounded the corner, that's when it happened. I heard the sharp, high-pitched click of heels on the hardwood floor. The sound was so out of place in the quiet library that it caught me off guard. I turned, and there she was, Grace, the HOA president. Her eyes immediately locked onto Sophia, and I could see the disdain flicker across her face like a shadow. Grace was standing there, clipboard in hand, her expression rigid and unforgiving. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice loud enough to echo through the quiet aisles. It wasn't a greeting, it wasn't a request. It was a command. I felt my stomach tighten. Not now, I thought. Not here. I tried to remain calm, but the irritation bubbled up inside me. "Yes, Grace," I said, my voice as neutral as I could manage. Her gaze moved from Sophia's wheelchair to me, then back to my daughter. Her eyes narrowed. "Your daughter's wheelchair is too noisy for the quiet zone," she said, her words crisp, like she had rehearsed them 1,000 times before. "This is a library. If you can't control the noise, you'll have to leave." The words hit me like a slap. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was a public space, a place for everyone, and yet Grace, always the enforcer of rules, always on a crusade to maintain the perfect neighborhood, was now telling me that my daughter, who had every right to be here, wasn't welcome because her wheelchair made a sound. Sophia, who had barely spoken, stared up at me, her eyes wide and innocent, not understanding why this woman was staring at her with such disdain. My heart broke a little more with each passing second. "Grace," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the anger rising within me. "She's just a child. She can't control the sound of her wheelchair. We're not disturbing anyone." Her lips curled into a thin, disapproving line. "The rules are clear," she said, tapping her clipboard with a pencil. "No noise in the quiet zone. If you want to stay, you'll have to move her." I felt my blood start to boil. My daughter, a little girl with a disability, was being told she wasn't allowed to be in a place meant for everyone because her wheelchair might make noise? The unfairness of it, the sheer cruelty of it, hit me like a wave, and for a brief moment I wanted to scream. But before I could say anything more, before I could try to reason with this woman, Grace's hand shifted, and I saw it. In the briefest of moments, she pulled out a small handgun from beneath her jacket. The sight of the gun took my breath away, and my heart stopped. Time seemed to slow, and I froze in place, unable to process what was happening. The world around me faded into a blur, and all I could focus on was Grace's cold eyes staring down the barrel of the weapon at my daughter. "Sophia," I said, my voice hoarse with fear, "get back." But it was too late. The gunshot rang out, loud and terrifying in the stillness of the library. The echo seemed to rattle the walls, the floor beneath me shaking as if the very foundation of the library had cracked open. I heard Sophia's terrified cry just before I pulled her into my arms, clutching her with every ounce of strength I had. The world around me erupted into chaos. The screams, the panic, the rush of footsteps. None of it registered as I held my daughter, her tiny body trembling in my arms, blood beginning to soak into my shirt. The pain in my chest was so sharp it almost felt physical. How had it come to this? How had a simple trip to the library turned into a nightmare? I looked up at Grace, standing motionless, the gun still in her hand, her expression cold and detached. And in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. This woman had just declared war on the wrong family. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Maple Creek had always been the epitome of suburban perfection. Every house on the block was immaculately kept, the lawns trimmed just the right amount, the flower beds bursting with vibrant color. The streets were lined with tall, majestic trees that offered a blanket of shade during the hot summer months, and every other house seemed to have a perfect picket fence. The neighborhood was clean, orderly, and quiet, everything a young family like ours had always dreamed of. A place where children could ride their bikes without fear of traffic, where neighbors greeted each other with smiles, and where every evening felt like the picture-perfect image of suburban bliss. It was, in every sense of the word, a small, peaceful oasis. I had always imagined this kind of life for my family. The kind of life where we could grow old, watch our children grow, and enjoy the simplicity of the little moments. When Rachel and I had decided to move to Maple Creek, we had thought it would be a fresh start, a place where we could raise our children and live out our dreams in safety and serenity. We were a young couple with big hopes, and with the birth of Sophia, our world felt like it was coming together exactly the way we had imagined. But that peaceful illusion, as perfect as it seemed, was built on fragile foundations. It was easy to get swept up in the beauty of the neighborhood, the pristine lawns, the perfect houses, but as I would come to learn, things weren't always as flawless as they appeared. Beneath the surface of that suburban paradise lay a rigid system of rules and control, a set of unspoken laws enforced by the very people who live there. And at the helm of this micromanaged world was Grace, the self-proclaimed queen of Maple Creek, who would become the thorn in our side for the months to come. Sophia's birth had been difficult. She had been born with a disability that required her to use a wheelchair for mobility. It wasn't easy at first. The transition to caring for a child with special needs came with its challenges, doctor's appointments, therapies, constant adjustments to our daily routine. But Rachel and I had adapted. We didn't want our daughter to grow up feeling limited. We wanted to create a life for her where she could explore, engage with the world, and experience the same joys as any other child. Our routine was simple, but it worked for us. Every morning, I would wake up early just before sunrise. The first few hours of the day were my time, quiet, peaceful, and filled with the comforting hum of the house waking up. I'd make coffee, get the newspaper, and sit for a moment in the kitchen, reflecting on the day ahead. Rachel would usually wake up shortly after, her sleepy smile always lighting up the room. Together, we'd get Sophia ready for the day, dressing her, helping her with breakfast, and making sure she was comfortable. We had a system, a rhythm that felt natural, like a dance we had choreographed, without even realizing it. Sophia, despite everything, had an infectious energy. Her bright blue eyes sparkled with curiosity, and her giggles could make the whole room light up. I loved watching her explore the world, even from her wheelchair. We had installed ramps around the house, making sure she could move from room to room with ease. And when we would take her outside, I would push her along the sidewalk, and she would point out the flowers, the birds, and the occasional dog that would walk past. She had this way of looking at the world, full of wonder, that made everything feel just a little brighter. Our neighborhood had its rhythm too. Every morning, I would wave to the same neighbors who passed by on their morning jogs. There was Karen, the young mother who lived two houses down, jogging with her twins in a stroller. Mrs. Peterson, the sweet elderly woman who lived across the street, would sit on her porch with a cup of coffee, greeting everyone who walked by. Even Grace, the HOA president, would occasionally wave as she walked her dog, a pristine white poodle, always with her clipboard in hand. I had heard people whisper about Grace behind her back. She had a reputation for being difficult. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but the more I observed her, the more I realized that her control over the neighborhood was more than just about keeping things nice. It was about maintaining order, her version of it. Rules were rules, and there was no room for flexibility. No exceptions. She was the embodiment of perfection and precision, and it was clear that she expected everyone to follow her lead. We had received the welcome packet when we moved in, filled with all the HOA guidelines. I remember laughing about it with Rachel. No lawn decorations past sunset. No visible trash cans for more than 24 hours. The lawns had to be cut to a precise height. Even the type of plants allowed in front yards was regulated. It all seemed so trivial at first, like some kind of community standard to keep the neighborhood looking perfect. But as time went on, I started to notice the cracks in the system. The way Grace would hover around, making sure everyone was adhering to her rules. The way people would avoid eye contact with her, afraid of incurring her wrath. One afternoon, Rachel and I took Sophia to the park, and as we were getting ready to leave, Grace happened to walk by. She made a point of stopping, inspecting our yard from the sidewalk. I had just finished mowing the grass, and it was cut perfectly, but Grace still found a reason to criticize. "Your lawn's a little uneven near the tree," she had remarked, her tone almost condescending. It wasn't the first time she'd made an unnecessary comment, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Grace's presence in the neighborhood was a constant reminder that we were never quite perfect enough. That even in a place as seemingly flawless as Maple Creek, there were rules we had to follow, rules she would enforce without hesitation. And as much as I tried to ignore it, as much as I wanted to focus on raising Sophia and enjoying our family time, I began to feel the weight of it. The weight of being in a community that was perfect on the outside, but had a darker side. A side that would soon come crashing down, bringing with it the destruction of the peaceful life we had worked so hard to build. It was supposed to be a perfect afternoon. After weeks of staying cooped up at home, it felt like a small victory, just a trip to the library, a peaceful outing for Sophia and me. I had even put extra thought into this day. Rachel was still recovering from the endless demands of the past weeks, so I decided to take Sophia on my own. A little time away from the house would do us both good. We had been looking forward to this simple joy for a while. The moment we stepped into the library, the comforting smell of old books and the cool air washed over me. Sophia's eyes brightened as she wheeled her way down the aisle, her fingers tracing the spines of colorful books. Her giggles were the sweetest music to my ears, and for a moment I was at peace. We were in the children's section, the section where Sophia could be herself, no judgments, no looks, just the pure joy of being in a space where kids could explore and learn. The other children were sitting on the floor, their faces buried in their books, lost in the worlds the pages offered. I couldn't have asked for a better place for her to be. I pushed her wheelchair over to one of the cozy corners where we could sit on the soft carpet, away from the rows of bookshelves. The library was busy, but it was always quiet here. This was a sanctuary for families like ours. Sophia was happy. I was happy. And for once, I didn't have to worry about someone like Grace, our HOA president, barging in and making everything about rules and regulations. But the peace was short-lived. As I got comfortable, I noticed a shadow falling over us. I looked up to see Grace, standing in front of us, clipboard in hand, her lips curling into the faintest of frowns as she looked down at Sophia's wheelchair. I immediately felt the familiar pang of unease that came every time I saw her, her sharp, calculating eyes, the look of authority she wore like a second skin. Grace had always been the self-appointed enforcer of perfection in Maple Creek, always prying into everyone's business with an unwavering obsession to maintain control over the smallest of details. "Excuse me," she said, her voice piercing the calmness of the room. There was no courtesy in her tone, no warmth. It was a demand. I felt my pulse quicken. "Yes, Grace?" I replied, trying my best to keep the frustration out of my voice. Grace didn't hesitate. She looked down at Sophia with the kind of cold judgment that only someone like her could carry. "Your daughter's wheelchair is too noisy," she said, her voice low but clipped. "You're disturbing the quiet area. This is a library." For a moment, I stood frozen. Was she serious? I glanced down at Sophia, whose small hands were clutching the armrests of her chair, her innocent face looking up at me with a sweet smile. She had no idea why this woman was looking at her like she was a disruption. She was a child, no different from any other child in the library, simply enjoying the space. But Grace didn't see her as a child. She didn't see her at all as a person with feelings. To Grace, Sophia was nothing more than an inconvenience in her quest for control. "Grace," I said, my voice strained as I stood up, taking a deep breath. "This is a public space. She's not making noise to disturb anyone." I could feel my chest tightening as I tried to stay calm. "She's just a child, Grace. She has every right to be here." But Grace wasn't hearing any of it. She didn't look at Sophia with empathy or even an ounce of understanding. No, she was scanning the area with sharp, judgmental eyes, as though searching for more reasons to criticize. "Rules are rules," she said, her voice dismissive. "This area is meant for quiet reading, and the noise from her wheelchair is disruptive. You need to move her, or I'll have to report this." I felt the sting of her words, each one cutting deeper than the last. My heart pounded in my chest, and a wave of frustration and anger washed over me. I glanced around the library at the other patrons who were reading in peace, none of them bothered by the soft, rhythmic sound of the wheelchair's wheels gliding along the floor. But for Grace, that sound, no matter how faint, was enough to throw off her perfect sense of order. I tried to reason with her. "Grace, she's not disturbing anyone. There are other children here. You can't single her out just because she's in a wheelchair. She has the right to be here just as much as anyone else." But Grace's face remained unchanged, hard and unyielding. "The rules apply to everyone," she said, her voice sharp. "If you can't keep her quiet, you'll have to leave." Her eyes narrowed, and her gaze fell on me like a hawk sizing up its prey. "This library isn't a place for children like her to make noise. It's for people who respect the rules." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had seen Grace enforce the HOA's ridiculous rules before, complaints about a mailbox being too crooked, fines for people not bringing in their trash cans at precisely the right time, but this was a new low. I felt the heat of anger rising in my chest. Sophia didn't deserve this. No child did. But Grace wasn't interested in what was right or fair. She was interested in control. "Grace," I said, my voice growing louder, frustration seeping through. "This is a library, not a prison. We're not here to break any rules. We're just trying to enjoy a peaceful day." But Grace wasn't having any of it. "Then leave," she snapped, her voice colder than ever. "You're making everyone uncomfortable. Either move your daughter, or I'll have to take further action." I felt a sharp jolt of anger as I looked at Grace, who was now scribbling something down on her clipboard. She didn't even seem to care that she was hurting us, hurting Sophia. I could feel my blood pressure rising, my hands trembling with the need to fight back, but I knew the last thing I wanted was to escalate things. This was supposed to be a peaceful day, and yet, somehow, Grace had found a way to ruin it. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice steady but firm. "And neither is she. You can't treat us like this." But before I could say anything more, before I could even comprehend what was happening, I saw it. Grace's hand shifted, and in a flash, she pulled a gun from beneath her jacket, pointing it directly at Sophia. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. For a split second, time seemed to slow, and all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. My mind raced. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. But as I looked at Grace, her face cold and unfeeling, I knew it wasn't a joke. The woman standing before me was capable of anything, and she had just crossed a line I could never unsee. Sophia! I shouted, my voice thick with panic, but it was already too late. Grace's finger tightened on the trigger. The air around me felt thick, suffocating, as I stood there, paralyzed by the sight of Grace pointing a gun at my daughter. My chest tightened with fear, but beneath that fear was something else, something deeper, something more dangerous. I had always prided myself on staying calm, on keeping a level head, no matter what life threw my way. But this was different. I was standing in a library, a place meant for peace and learning, and the woman I had once viewed as nothing more than a stern, overbearing neighbor had become the embodiment of everything wrong with the world. I wanted to scream at her, to demand that she lower the weapon and explain herself. But my voice caught in my throat. What could I possibly say to a woman who had no regard for the safety of my daughter? She was too far gone. Too far into her quest for control. There was no reasoning with her. No negotiating. She had drawn a line in the sand, and she was determined to cross it no matter the cost. And the worst part? I felt utterly powerless. I had always thought that, as a father, I was supposed to be the one who protected my family. I had imagined myself as the shield that kept anything from hurting them, especially my daughter. I had worked so hard to give Sophia the life she deserved, to ensure that she never had to feel like an outsider, never had to face the unfairness that seemed to define the world outside of Maple Creek. But now, standing in front of Grace, with her gun aimed at Sophia, I felt like everything I had worked for, everything I had promised her, was slipping through my fingers. There was a coldness to the situation that made my blood run cold. The library, once a place of solace, now felt like a cage. The walls closed in, the overhead lights buzzing above me, the silence broken only by my quickened breathing. I wanted to protect Sophia, to scoop her up and run out of that room as fast as I could. But I couldn't. Not with Grace blocking the exit, not with the gun aimed squarely at the most precious thing in my life. What kind of father was I if I couldn't even protect her here? In a public space, of all places? I felt my fists ball up, my knuckles aching with the pressure of my clenched hands. I could feel the rage building inside me, pushing against the walls of my chest, desperate to be released. I wanted to fight back. I wanted to tear this woman apart for daring to put my daughter in danger, for making us feel like criminals for simply existing in this world. But what was I supposed to do? I wasn't prepared for this. I had never imagined that one day the quiet little town we had chosen for its safety and peace would become the setting for this kind of violence. I wasn't trained for this. I wasn't ready for the kind of fight Grace was forcing me into. For a moment, all I could do was stand there, helpless. The tears welled up in my eyes, but I forced them back. I couldn't let myself break down, not now. Not in front of my daughter. I had promised myself that I would always be strong for her, that no matter what happened, I would stand firm, that I would protect her from everything, from anything. But now, with the reality of Grace's cruelty sinking in, I realized how small and powerless I truly felt. What kind of father couldn't even protect his own child from a woman who saw us as nothing more than an inconvenience? The anger surged again, hotter this time. How dare she? How dare she come into our lives and destroy everything we had built? The feeling of helplessness transformed into something else, something darker. The quiet, controlling rage I had buried deep inside for so long started to awaken. The same rage that had driven me through the tough times in my life, the anger that had fueled the mistakes I had made in my past, the part of me I thought I had left behind. But here it was again, clawing its way to the surface. I couldn't just stand there. I couldn't let her win. I had to do something. But even as I felt the anger build inside me, there was a nagging voice in the back of my mind telling me that this wasn't the way. Violence, revenge, it was the easy way out. It was the way that people like Grace would want me to respond. If I let my anger control me, I would become no better than her. And I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let myself fall into the same trap that she had. Sophia's small voice broke through the suffocating silence, her tiny hand reaching out toward me. "Daddy," she whispered, her eyes wide with confusion, not understanding the danger, but sensing the tension in the air. Her innocent trust in me made my heart ache. How could I let this happen to her? How could I let her feel scared in a place that was supposed to be safe? I looked at her, and in that moment I realized that I couldn't let her see me crumble. She needed me. I had to keep it together. I had to be the father she believed in. I had to find a way to protect her without resorting to violence, without letting Grace push me into becoming someone I wasn't. "Everything's going to be okay, sweetie," I whispered, my voice shaky but determined. I couldn't let Grace see my fear. I couldn't let her see my internal struggle. I wasn't going to let her have control over me any longer. I would fight for my daughter, but I would do it the right way, by using my brain, not my fists. Grace's gaze was unwavering as she stood there, her fingers still on the trigger. I could see the coldness in her eyes, the way she viewed herself as being above everyone else. She wasn't used to people standing up to her. She wasn't used to anyone defying her rules. But I wasn't going to be another victim of her cruel power trip. I had to outsmart her. I had to be strong for Sophia, for Rachel, and for myself. As I looked at Grace, I realized something. She didn't have the power she thought she did. She could control the neighborhood with her rules, but she couldn't control me. Not anymore. And that realization sparked something inside me, something that pushed back the fear, the anger, the doubt. I would protect my family. I would find a way to do it, even if it meant fighting Grace in a way she never expected. The struggle between fear and rage continued to fight within me. But in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I would face her. I would stand tall. I would not let her turn my life and my daughter's life into a battle of power. I had a choice to make, and I was ready to make it. The seconds stretched on like an eternity. I could still hear the ringing in my ears from the gunshot, my heart hammering in my chest, a constant reminder of how quickly everything had spiraled out of control. Grace stood there, her hand still on the gun, her eyes cold and unflinching as she watched me struggle to keep it together. Sophia's soft sobs echoed in my head, and I couldn't help but glance at her, terrified that something had happened, that I was too late. Her tiny hand reached up to touch mine, as if reassuring me, but I couldn't reassure myself. I didn't know how to protect her from this kind of madness. I took a slow, measured breath, trying to calm the raging storm inside me, but it wasn't working. The fear was still there, gnawing at my insides. My fingers trembled slightly as I gripped the wheelchair, my knuckles turning white from the force of my hold. Grace had always been a presence in the neighborhood, but this was something entirely different. This wasn't just about enforcing rules. This was about power. She wasn't asking for respect, she was demanding it. And the worst part? She was succeeding. I had hoped that when Grace saw the fear in my eyes, the threat of violence, she backed down. I had hoped that there was some part of her that would recognize how wrong this was. But I was wrong. Grace didn't care. Grace wasn't afraid. Grace wasn't even human in that moment. She was a force, a cold, calculated agent of cruelty, standing there with the barrel of the gun aimed at the most precious thing in my life, and there was nothing I could do to stop her. I had thought that when we moved here, we would be safe. That Maple Creek, with its manicured lawns and smiling neighbors, would be the kind of place where we could raise Sophia in peace. It had always seemed so perfect, so idyllic. But now I understood the truth. Grace was the monster in our neighborhood, and we were all just waiting for her to strike. I had to make a decision. Grace was standing firm, her hand unwavering on the gun. She was in control, and I could see it in the way she looked at me, dismissive, cold, confident. I could feel the walls closing in around me, like I was suffocating, trapped in a game I had no chance of winning. "Sophia is a child," I said, my voice shaky but trying to sound steady. "She's not hurting anyone. She has every right to be here. This is a public library." The words felt hollow as soon as they left my lips. I was appealing to her sense of decency, but I knew it was pointless. Grace didn't have decency. She had power. She had control. And she wasn't going to let it go easily. But as I spoke, I saw something in her expression shift. It wasn't empathy. Grace didn't have an ounce of empathy, but there was something darker there. It was almost like she was enjoying this. Her eyes flickered with a twisted satisfaction, and the gun's barrel never wavered. "Sophia is disturbing the peace," she said, her tone still calm, calculated, as if the words coming out of her mouth were entirely rational. "And you," she paused, her gaze flickering over me with disdain, "you should be ashamed of yourself. As a parent, you should be teaching your daughter how to behave in public." I felt my jaw clench as my blood boiled. This wasn't just about a noisy wheelchair. This was about everything. The rules, the power, the need to control. I was starting to see it for what it truly was. Grace was like a tyrant lording over the lives of everyone who lived in Maple Creek. And now, she had decided that our family, Sophia especially, was a threat to her perfect little kingdom. I glanced down at Sophia, her small body trembling in the wheelchair, her wide eyes filled with confusion. She had no idea what was happening. She didn't understand why this woman was trying to hurt her, why she was being treated this way. My heart broke in my chest as I saw her little hands shaking, her lips trembling as she tried to make sense of it all. She was so young. Too young for this. Too innocent. The anger I had been suppressing suddenly surged up like a tidal wave, and for a moment I could feel the darkness creeping in, the part of me that had always been there, the part of me that had survived fights and chaos long before I met Rachel and moved to Maple Creek. I wasn't some passive victim. I wasn't going to let Grace do this to my family. Not now, not ever. I stood straighter, taking a deep breath. My body tensed, ready for whatever came next. But Grace wasn't done. "You have two choices, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice a cold, detached monotone. "You either move your daughter out of here immediately, or I'll make sure you and your family are never welcome in this neighborhood again." Her words were threatening, but it was the coldness in her eyes that shook me the most. Grace wasn't afraid of me. She wasn't afraid of anything. And that, I realized, was the real danger. I could see it now, the ugly truth. Grace wasn't just a petty HOA president. She was a bully who hid behind rules and regulations to manipulate people, to control them. She used fear as a weapon, and for years it had worked. The neighbors were afraid of her, cowering in their homes, unwilling to challenge her because of the power she held. And now, Sophia and I were her next targets? I swallowed hard, my mind racing. How did I protect my family from this? How could I fight back against someone who operated outside the bounds of common sense and decency? I was used to facing down difficult situations, but this was different. This wasn't just about standing up for our rights anymore. This was about my daughter's safety, about protecting her from a woman who had no conscience. The reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. If I didn't act now, Grace would take everything from us. She would use her power to tear apart the life we had worked so hard to build. For a moment, I felt helpless again, like I was drowning in the weight of everything I couldn't control. Sophia's fear, my own frustration, the world closing in around us. The stakes had never been higher. But as I looked at Grace, I knew I had no choice. I couldn't back down. I couldn't let her win. I had to find a way to protect Sophia and Rachel, even if it meant standing up to the very person who had been running this neighborhood with a fist of iron. Grace's smirk remained as she stood there, her gun still aimed at my daughter. The situation was escalating, and with each passing moment, the walls seemed to close in tighter. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my thoughts racing. What was I willing to risk to protect my family? What was I willing to do? The tension between us was palpable. The calm before the storm had passed. The storm was here, and there was no escaping it. The quiet hum of the library had vanished in an instant, replaced by the deafening sound of my pulse in my ears. My heart was pounding, a primal beat that made it hard to hear anything else. Everything had become a blur. The faces around me, the shelves, even the floor beneath my feet. I couldn't focus on anything but the cold, unblinking eyes of Grace, her hand gripping the gun, aimed directly at Sophia. Time seemed to stretch out, each second dragging on like a weight pressing down on my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to leap in front of Sophia, to pull her away, but my body wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, trapped in the grip of sheer terror. How had it come to this? How had we gone from a quiet trip to the library to this, me standing in front of the woman who had decided my daughter wasn't worthy of even most basic human decency? I looked at Grace, but I couldn't understand what I saw on her face. There was no sign of hesitation, no flicker of doubt. She was as cold as ice, completely unwavering in her mission. Her eyes were filled with contempt, as though this was nothing more than another one of her rules she had to enforce, and Sophia's presence, her wheelchair, was simply a violation of that order. But this wasn't about rules anymore. This was about a woman who had completely lost sight of what it meant to be human. She wasn't just a neighbor with too much power, she had become a monster, wielding that power with the sole intent of tearing my family apart. I could feel Sophia's trembling hand reaching for mine, and I was finally able to move, though it felt like the world was moving in slow motion. My eyes locked onto the small, innocent face of my daughter, and in that moment, everything I had ever feared came crashing into my mind. I had promised Rachel, that nothing would ever happen to us. Not like this. We had worked so hard for the peaceful life we had, fought so hard to give Sophia the normal childhood she deserved. And now here we were, in the middle of a nightmare, because one woman couldn't stand the fact that my daughter's existence made the world a little less perfect in her eyes. Grace's finger tightened on the trigger, and I heard the click, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. Everything inside me screamed to act, to protect Sophia, to do anything, but my body was still frozen. I could see the barrel of the gun moving ever so slightly, aiming right at Sophia. Then it happened. The sound of the gunshot was like nothing I had ever experienced. It was louder than the noise of 1,000 cars, louder than a bomb exploding in the center of the library. It rang out deafening, overwhelming, and my first instinct was to duck. But before I could even react, I saw Sophia's face, her eyes wide with shock and confusion as she looked up at me. And then I saw the blood. A warm, sticky feeling seeped into my hands as I instinctively reached out to her. The world seemed to tilt beneath me as I collapsed to my knees, cradling her small, fragile body against me. Her wheelchair tipped slightly with the force of the movement, but I didn't care. I held her tight, my arms trembling as I searched her face for any sign of life, any hint that she was okay. Sophia! I screamed, my voice breaking with panic. Her eyes, wide with confusion, looked up at me. But there was no recognition there, just a deep, sinking fear that made my heart break all over again. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. I was still processing the horror of the moment, the reality that my daughter had been shot in front of me, and all I could do was hold her. Her tiny body was warm against mine, but I felt the dampness of the blood, and I knew I had to act. I had to get her out of here. The library had descended into chaos. People were shouting, running toward us, but it felt like everything was moving in slow motion. I heard the distant sound of footsteps, of people yelling at Grace to drop the gun, but it all sounded muffled, as if I were underwater. I couldn't focus on anything but Sophia, her soft, shallow breathing, her trembling little body, still in my arms. "Stay with me, baby," I whispered, my voice hoarse, the words almost a prayer. I could feel my heart racing, my panic rising with each second that passed. The gunshot had hit her, but I didn't know how badly. I looked up at Grace, my vision blurry with anger and fear. She stood there, unmoving, watching us. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even surprised. She was cold and calm, like she had done nothing more than swat a fly. She was a monster. I could see it now. She didn't care about the rules. She didn't care about anything but her own need for control. As I looked back at Sophia, I felt the weight of everything, my failure, my fear, the panic. I had been helpless paralyzed, but not anymore. The moment I saw that Grace had pulled the trigger, I knew I had to fight. I had to protect my family. I couldn't let her get away with this. I wasn't going to let Grace destroy everything I had fought for. The room swirled around me. The paramedics had arrived, pushing past people who had gathered around us, their voices a blur of urgency. I felt two someones grab me, trying to pull me away, but I wouldn't let go of Sophia. She's my daughter. I shouted, my voice raw. She's my daughter, and I won't let her go. One of the paramedics was kneeling beside us, speaking to me, but I couldn't hear her. I couldn't focus on anything but Sophia, my eyes glued to her pale face, her tiny body still in my arms. I could hear the crackling of the police radio in the background, the officers rushing in, and the distant sound of sirens. It was all happening too fast, but I couldn't focus on anything except the overwhelming fear that my daughter might not make it. "Sophia, baby, please," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Please stay with me. Please." Her eyes flickered, her chest heaving with a shallow breath. And for a moment, I thought I had lost her. The fear that gripped my heart was suffocating. But then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, she let out a small, raspy breath, her tiny fingers gripping mine. She was alive. The paramedic quickly assessed the situation, and with practiced hands, she stabilized Sophia and prepared her for transport to the hospital. I wanted to go with them to stay by Sophia's side, but I had to stay behind, at least for now. Grace was still there, still standing, still holding that gun. Still a threat to everyone in the library, to everyone in the neighborhood. "Grace," I said, my voice low and filled with fury, "this isn't over. You're going to pay for what you've done." But Grace only smiled, that cold, calculating smile that made my blood boil. She had no remorse, no apology. She was a woman who thought she was above the law, above decency, and above everyone else. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I watched as Sophia was wheeled away on a stretcher, her tiny body so small against the sterile white sheets. I wanted to follow her, to be there for her, but I knew this moment wasn't just about us anymore. This was about making sure Grace paid for what she had done. It wasn't just a gunshot. It wasn't just about the rules. It was about Sophia's life, my family's future, and the kind of world we lived in, a world where people like Grace couldn't be allowed to control others without consequence. The world around me was chaos, but I was in a daze. I couldn't process it all. I held Sophia tightly in my arms, her small, fragile body trembling, blood soaking through my shirt, my hands slick with her warmth. Her face was pale, her eyes unfocused, and I felt the panic rise in my chest like a tidal wave. My thoughts were spinning, whirling around like the dust from a storm I had no way of escaping. The library had become a scene of utter disorder, shouting, running footsteps, and frantic murmurs. People were trying to help, but the situation had already spiraled too far out of control. I couldn't look away from Sophia's pale face, couldn't hear anything beyond the sound of her shallow breathing. Everything else felt distant, like a fog rolling in over my mind. The paramedics were now at her side, taking over the care she so desperately needed. But I couldn't let go of her. Not yet. "Sophia," I whispered over and over again, my voice shaking. I didn't know what else to say. I didn't know what to do. My body was moving on autopilot, my arms still holding her against me, but my mind was elsewhere, drowning in fear. The sound of the gunshot, the sharp, terrifying crack that had torn through the quiet of the library, kept ringing in my head, playing over and over like a broken record. It was the sound that had changed everything, the sound that had shattered the peace I had taken for granted. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I turned to see an officer standing beside me, his face filled with concern and urgency. "Sir, we need to get her to the hospital now," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "We need to make sure she's stable." I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I didn't want to let go. I couldn't. Not until I knew she was going to be okay. The paramedics were already lifting Sophia onto a stretcher, carefully securing her and connecting her to the life-saving machines that would give her a chance. My heart wrenched as I watched them take her away, my legs finally giving way as I sank to the floor, too weak to stand. I felt hollow, as though my entire world had been ripped from its foundation. The officer's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Come on, sir. We'll make sure she gets the care she needs. You need to come with us." I stood up slowly, my body moving like it didn't belong to me, my legs shaky beneath me. I followed the officer down the aisle, through the chaos, my mind in a fog. There was no time to think, no time to process the enormity of what had just happened. Grace, that cold, unfeeling woman who had always held power over this neighborhood, had just crossed the line in the most horrifying way possible. The gunshot, the blood, Sophia's tears, none of it made sense. Outside, the world had descended into mayhem. Ambulances were pulling up to the curb, their sirens wailing in the night. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the scene like something out of a nightmare. I could see officers and paramedics working together in a frantic blur, some of them talking to witnesses, some of them securing the area, but all I could focus on was Sophia, her life hanging in the balance, and the cold, calm face of Grace standing off to the side, her gun still in her hand as though she had done nothing wrong. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rush over and tear her apart for what she had done to my family, to my daughter. But I couldn't. The officers had already moved in, and Grace was being restrained. I heard the familiar sound of handcuffs snapping closed, and I turned to see them drag her away, her face pale, but strangely composed, as though she hadn't just committed a heinous act in front of a room full of people. She was calm, too calm. Grace was arrested for attempted murder. The investigation began immediately, and as I sat in the hospital waiting room, my mind raced. Every passing minute felt like a hammer pounding into my skull. I could barely keep my eyes open from exhaustion, but sleep didn't come. Not now. Not when I had no idea if Sophia would ever wake up. In the days that followed, I did everything I could to stay strong for Sophia. I spent every moment at her side, watching as the doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize her. They had to clear the blood from her lungs and monitor her for brain injuries, given the force of the gunshot. It was touch and go for a while, but each day she grew stronger, and every little sign of improvement felt like a small victory. But even as I rejoiced in the moments when she'd move her fingers or open her eyes, the anger inside me didn't subside. The investigation unfolded in the worst possible way. Grace, as expected, denied everything. She claimed that the gunshot had been an accident, a moment of self-defense after she feared for her safety. But that was impossible. Everyone in the library had witnessed the events unfold, and every piece of evidence pointed to her intentional actions. She had deliberately aimed the gun at my daughter, my 3-year-old disabled daughter, and fired. The evidence was clear, and yet Grace insisted on her innocence. It was maddening. The police interviewed the other library patrons, and many of them came forward with statements confirming what I already knew. Grace had been deliberately targeting us. One woman reported hearing Grace's threats moments before the shooting. Another recalled how Grace had walked toward us with the gun in her hand, as if she had made up her mind long before we ever set foot in the library. But Grace didn't back down. She still claimed that she was acting in self-defense, that her actions were justified by her role as HOA president. And that in itself was the most chilling part of the whole ordeal. Grace didn't see her actions as wrong. She saw them as necessary. In her twisted, delusional mind, she was doing the community a favor. She was protecting the peace of Maple Creek, no matter the cost. I couldn't let it stand. I couldn't let Grace walk away from this, free of consequences. I was determined to make sure that she faced justice for what she had done, not just to Sophia and me, but to everyone who had been affected by her cruelty. As I sat in the hospital, the anger inside me was starting to morph into something else. A quiet, burning resolve. If the justice system couldn't bring her to account, I would make sure she was held responsible. I would fight for Sophia and make sure she grew up in a world where people like Grace didn't get to hide behind their rules, their positions of power, where they couldn't get away with hurting people without facing the consequences. Sophia was getting better every day. Slowly but surely, she was healing, both physically and emotionally. Her doctors were optimistic, and I clung to that hope. Rachel was at my side, her hand holding mine as we sat together, waiting for the next step in Sophia's recovery. And as I watched Grace being led away, handcuffed and humiliated, I knew that this was far from over. But in that moment, I also knew that my family would heal. We would recover. And the monster who had brought this upon us would pay for what she had done. Justice in one form or another would be done. The days following that nightmare were a blur, a mixture of hospital visits, endless paperwork, and conversations with law enforcement. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks slowly gave way to months, the shock of it all began to wear off. It was replaced by something else, a quiet, deep reflection that had been steadily growing in the quiet corners of my mind. The terror, the fear, the helplessness of that moment, it had all changed me. It had altered the way I saw the world, and more importantly, the way I saw my family. There was a time when I thought I understood what it meant to be a father, to protect my family. But the truth was, I had never truly known what it felt like until Sophia was placed in my arms after the shooting. I had always thought I would be the protector, the one who kept danger at bay. I never imagined I would find myself in a situation where my child was threatened in such a brutal, unthinkable way. But that was exactly what happened, and in the aftermath, I learned something profound. I learned the true meaning of resilience. I learned that no matter what happened, I had the strength to stand up for my family no matter the cost. I had learned that there was nothing more important in this world than protecting the people I loved. The terror that had gripped me in the aftermath of Grace's actions, watching my daughter struggle, hearing the sharp crack of a gunshot ringing in my ears, had tested me in ways I never thought possible. But I had survived it. Sophia had survived it. And together, we were healing. Sophia was doing much better now. It hadn't been easy, her recovery was slow, and at times it felt like there was no end in sight. The doctors said her lungs had healed and that the damage from the gunshot had been minimal. But even as I looked at her tiny face, the one that had once been so full of innocence, I knew that what happened that day would never leave her. It wasn't just the physical scars that would stay with her. It was the emotional trauma, the fear, and the confusion of what Grace had done to us. But she was resilient. Sophia was stronger than anyone realized. Every day, she grew a little stronger. Every day, her laughter became a little louder, a little brighter. I had seen it with my own eyes. My daughter, the same girl who had been left trembling and broken after the gunshot, was starting to rebuild herself. Her confidence was returning. And with that confidence, she was learning to trust again. There were moments, quiet moments, usually in the early mornings when everything was still, that I could hear her talking to herself. It wasn't always coherent, but I knew what it meant. She was telling herself that she was okay, that she had made it through. And slowly but surely, I began to believe it too. I had always thought that being a father meant protecting my family from harm, but now I knew that it was about more than that. It was about being there for them, no matter what. It was about showing up every day, even when things seemed impossible. I had watched Sophia battle through her fear, her confusion, and her pain, and I had realized something about myself in the process. I had to do the same. I still remembered the terror of that moment, the moment when I thought I had lost her. It was a feeling that no parent should ever have to experience. The overwhelming sense of helplessness that had consumed me when I saw Grace standing there, gun in hand, aiming at my child, it would never leave me. But in the aftermath of that chaos, in the months of recovery, I had learned to appreciate the small victories. The moments when Sophia would smile, when her eyes would light up with excitement over the simplest things. I knew that we would never be the same, but I also knew that we had survived, and surviving meant we could rebuild. I had spent many nights sitting at her bedside, just watching her sleep, and I would think back to the moment that changed everything, the moment when everything seemed like it was falling apart. And I realized that the person I had been before, the man who feared his own anger, who feared that he couldn't protect his family, he was gone. In his place was someone stronger, someone who had fought not just for his family's safety, but for their spirit, for their ability to heal and grow. The man I had become was someone who would stop at nothing to protect the people I loved. Rachel and I had come a long way in the past few months. The wounds from that day were deep, and there were times when we both struggled to sleep, when we both had nightmares of the gunshot and the chaos that followed. But we had each other, and more importantly, we had Sophia, our anchor, our strength. Together, we were rebuilding our life brick by brick. We didn't know what the future held, but we knew that we were stronger together than we had ever been apart. As the days passed, the neighborhood began to recover from the shock of Grace's actions. People who had once been terrified of her, who had never dared to challenge her authority, were starting to speak up. Her reign of terror had finally ended. The truth was out, and the community was beginning to heal. The HOA was disbanded, and in its place, a new president was elected, someone who valued the well-being of the residents more than their conformity. The neighborhood, which had once been a place of fear and silence, was beginning to thrive again. Neighbors were talking to each other, helping one another, and for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of community that had been lost for years. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was better. It was real. And it was ours. Sophia and I had walked through the worst of it, and we had come out the other side stronger and more determined than ever. The road to recovery was long, but with each day, we grew closer. We learned to laugh again, to embrace the simple moments, to find joy in the everyday things. And through it all, I promised myself one thing. I would never again take for granted the importance of family, the importance of standing up for what is right, no matter the cost. I looked at Sophia now, sitting next to me on the porch swing as the evening sky turned golden, the sounds of the neighborhood settling into the quiet hum of nighttime. Rachel was tending to the garden, and I felt that familiar warmth spread through my chest. We had survived, and we had come out the other side stronger than ever. I wrapped my arm around Sophia, pulling her close, and kissed the top of her head. "You're safe now," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "You're safe, and I'll always protect you." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its golden glow over our small world, I knew that nothing, not even the darkest of forces, could ever take this from us. We were free, we were whole, and together, we would face whatever the future had in store together. If you enjoyed this intense and emotional story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to HOA Karen Shorts for more gripping tales of courage, survival, and justice. Share this video with your friends and family, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story. Stay tuned for more heart-wrenching tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thanks for being part of our community.